Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is a quadriplegic and former Nassau County, New York Assistant District Attorney. He is also the author of the autobiography, I Dream of Things That Never Were, the Ken Kunken Story. His name, as the title of his book suggests, is Ken Kunken, and my interview with Ken will follow the note-taking sounds. Ken Kunken, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you for having me as your guest.
You were rendered a quadriplegic back in 1970 after a sprint football, which is a former gridiron football for athletes under a certain weight that a lot of East Coast colleges play after an injury in that sport. But you returned to college to complete your education. What was it like to attend college as a quadriplegic before the Americans with Disabilities Act was enacted?
Oh, it was so difficult because not just was the coursework that I was pursuing difficult. Here, I was studying industrial engineering at Cornell University, which was one of the most prestigious engineering colleges in the country, but the campus was particularly inaccessible. I mean, Cornell is located in upstate Ithaca, New York, and it's on a very hilly terrain, and just about every one of its buildings had steps in front of it. And there was not one ramp or curb cut on the entire campus. Now, because I'm a quadriplegic, I use an electric wheelchair. But I couldn't use my electric wheelchair up at school because of all the steps. So I needed to be sitting in a manual wheelchair and have my attendant pull me up and down all the steps every single day just to go to class. So actually listening to the lectures was almost the least of my concerns. My biggest worry was how I was going to get up and down those steps and get back and forth to class.
You worked for organizations that help disabled people, and then you were an assistant district attorney in Nassau County, New York, which is on Long Island. What was your nonprofit work helping disabled people, as well as your work as an assistant prosecutor like?
Well, it was certainly challenging, but really, really rewarding that I had the opportunity to do both of those jobs. I mean, when I was injured, you didn't see a lot of people in my physical condition in the workplace. I mean, not only am I not able to use my legs, I'm basically not able to use my arms either. I'm almost totally paralyzed below the shoulders. So I need help doing virtually everything. So convincing an employer to give me the opportunity to actually work at a job was extremely difficult. So just so your listeners know, I graduated with my degree in industrial engineering from Cornell in 1973. And at that time, I became the first quadriplegic to ever graduate from Cornell. But this was well before the Americans with Disabilities Act. And you didn't see a lot of people in my condition out in public places back then, let alone in the workplace. So I knew that because it would be very difficult for me to function as an engineer, I needed to change my career goals. So I returned to school, and through the advice of one of my psychology professors by the name of Dr. James Moss, he convinced me to pursue a career in counseling. So I returned to Cornell, earned my Master of Arts degree from Cornell in counseling, and then to increase my counseling credentials, I went to Columbia University, which happened to also be the school I was injured in a game against. And I earned my second master's degree, this one in psychological counseling and rehabilitation. And I started to look for a job with now 3 Ivy League degrees, Aaron, 2 master's degrees, and no one would hire me. It seemed in 1975, 1976, everyone seemed to feel I was just too disabled to work. And at that time, Aaron, I was even turned down when I offered to volunteer my services. But I was really fortunate that I met Dr. Henry Viscardi Jr., who was the founder of the Viscardi Center here on Long Island. And he hired me to work at his corporation that was then called Abilities Incorporated to provide vocational and placement counseling to other individuals who had severe disabilities. And that made an enormous, enormous difference in my life. Now, to finally be able to help others after, for years and years, I had been the recipient of so much help.
Without spoiling too much about your book, I Dream of Things That Never Were, the Ken Kunken Story, is it an autobiography or a memoir, and what is it about?
Well, it's a memoir, and it's about the challenges that I faced in my entire life, both before my injury, but particularly after my injury. I talk about what it was like having spent 9 months and 20 days in various hospitals and rehabilitation centers, what it was like going back to school well before the Americans with Disabilities Act, trying to convince an employer to give me the chance to show what I could do in the workplace and, you know, trying to lead a useful, productive, and rewarding and a happy life. But Aaron, let me just tell you a little bit about where I came up with the name, the title for my book. While I was still a patient in the Rusk Institute undergoing rehabilitation, I was asked to testify before a United States Health Subcommittee chaired by Senator Edward Kennedy. And 8 days after my testimony, Senator Kennedy sent me a glass paperweight in the mail that had an inscription on it that the senator said was a statement his late brother Robert Kennedy liked very much. And it's the words on that inscription have always been so meaningful to me. The inscription read, "Some men see things as they are and say why. I dream of things that never were and say why not." And that's why I got the title of my book, I Dream of Things That Never Were, the Ken Kunken Story.
What motivated you to write a book about your life?
Actually, it was a friend of my Aunt Lorraine's by the name of Albert Meglin that visited me while I was still in the rehab center. In fact, the first day that he came to visit me was the same week I had testified before the United States Health Subcommittee. And he told me that he thought it would be interesting for people to learn more about what it was like to have a spinal cord injury and the process was to go through rehabilitation. Now, remember, Aaron, this was 25 years before Christopher Reeve's injury. So people didn't know very much about the ramifications of a spinal cord injury. In addition, Mr. Meglin, excuse me, knew that I was severely depressed at the time. And I think he felt by talking about what I was going through could help with my depression as well as being informative to other people. So it was through his initiation that I started writing this book more than 50 years ago. And I actually didn't finish it till a year and a half ago, more than 50 years in the making of this book. Part of this book, I even tried to type myself with braces and splints because I still had a little bit of movement in my left arm. And on a good day, I could get up to typing 10 words a minute, but that didn't last for more than a minute or two before my left arm totally fatigued. So trying to write this book for me was particularly difficult. I ended up having to dictate the book to just jumping ahead a bit. I'm married, and I ended up dictating the book to my wife as a way of not just sharing my story with other people, but bringing her into more of my story and letting her know in detail exactly what it was that I went through.
Even though it took you 50 years or so to complete your book, and Obviously, there were a lot of physical and technical accommodations that were necessary for you to write a book as a quadriplegic. What did you enjoy most about writing your book?
What I enjoyed writing most was sitting next to my wife for hours at a time and telling her in detail every step in the process of what I went through all of those years. Because while she basically knew my story, she didn't know all the specifics and all the details about it. And I thought that by writing this book, it could help others that were going through difficult times, whether they be facing adversity or, certain challenges that just seemed insurmountable in their lives. And for me, it was such a challenge because I had never really written anything before. I mean, keep in mind, my undergraduate degree was in engineering. We were known for being very good in math and science, but not especially good in English. So writing for a book for me was particularly challenging. And in addition, my wife is from Poland, so English is not her native language. So trying to tell my wife what happened and having her type it up in English was particularly challenging because here I was talking about things that happened on the football field, and she didn't know much about American football. I was talking about specific medical procedures I went through, which would be difficult for somebody whose native language was English, but trying to explain it to somebody who was not familiar with those terms because she was brought up in Poland posed even more challenges. So, it was very challenging trying to dictate this book. And I initially tried, after I had met many times with Albert Meglin, to use voice recognition. That was relatively new at the time. It was just coming into play. And the system wasn't nearly as good as it is now. And I had trouble getting the computer to respond adequately to my voice. So as a result, that didn't work out for me. And we had to sit by her laptop computer, and it was a very slow process, going step by step, what my injury entailed, what the rehabilitation was like, and all the events that followed.
Is your book independently, traditionally, or hybrid published?
No, we have a publisher. The publisher is an individual by the name of Stephen Eric, who is the owner and of the company called 12 Tables Press. And actually, that publishing company is really dedicated to publishing books concerning legal issues and lawyers. And while I am a lawyer, I mean, I don't think your audience knows that after I worked as a rehabilitation counselor for a number of years, I left that field and went to Hofstra University's law school. And then I went to work as an assistant district attorney. So while my book contains chapters about my work in the district attorney's office, I don't really consider it a legal book, but I was fortunate. Steve Eric saw my book proposal, liked it very much, and agreed to publish it.
I have 3 questions to finish out this interview. Why is it important to keep expectations high for yourself and for others?
Well, because expectations were so low for me following my injury. And I know even medical personnel had such low expectations for other individuals who had disabilities or were dealing with, specific physical or emotional or intellectual issues in their lives. And I thought that this could help show individuals and families that there's still so much you can do if you work hard, and keep your expectations high. I might add that while I was a patient in the rehab facility, it seemed the very best the medical personnel thought that I would ever be able to do would be to someday sell magazine subscriptions over the telephone. That was the expectations for me back then, if I was able to work at all. I wanted to show people don't have such limited expectations because your expectations often have a profound effect on what people eventually are able to accomplish. And by keeping expectations high, people are more likely to work hard to reach those expectations. So it's better to set high goals for yourself and then work hard to try and reach them.
You are the father of triplet sons that graduated from the same high school you did 50 years after you did. What is it like to be the father of triplet sons?
Oh, it's the greatest thing in the world. I tell you, after my injury, there was so many depressing and discouraging thoughts racing through my mind. But I never, ever, ever thought that someday I would be able to not only get married, but to become a father. But through my wife's encouragement, after we were married, we pursued in vitro fertilization. And through the miracle of science, Anna became pregnant. And not just pregnant, but pregnant with triplets. And Aaron, I might add that I was actually present in the delivery room when my wife gave birth on January 24th, 2005, to triplet boys. I have three incredible sons, Joey, Jimmy, and Timmy. They're now completing their sophomore years at three separate colleges in upstate New York. And it was when I first, started thinking in detail what it was like to be the father of triplets was, shortly after my boys were born. Triplets are always born prematurely. And all my boys are healthy and incredibly bright. But when they were first born, they spent some time in the neonatal intensive care unit at North Shore Hospital on Long Island. And I remember sitting by their little incubators and looking at them, and it was suddenly this impact that it had on me, like, wow, this is a story that needs to be told. And that really encouraged me not just to work hard on the book, but to have a memoir that my boys can actually read once they got older. And I'm so proud to say they've all read it now and are so proud of me, their father, for what I went through. And it makes them feel even prouder about themselves and what it was like for them to grow up in a household of an immigrant mother who has a different religion than their father. So they were exposed to both the Catholic and the Jewish religion, and being raised by a father who is a quadriplegic. I mean, their life experiences are so different than virtually every other child. And to be a triplet, no less, I felt so moved that this was a story that really needed to be told. And I hope it could inspire other people to do more with their lives. And I might add that while it's out in hardcover and an ebook version on Kindle, my son Timothy actually helped us record this book as an audiobook. And now it's available as an audiobook as well.
There's a on your author website, and I'll include this in a link in the text description of this episode once it's uploaded. You have a quote from the late John Lennon, who once said, "Life is what happens to you while you are busy making other plans." After all you've been through and done in life, what keeps you going?
What keeps me going now are my wife and my three incredible sons. Every time I look at them, they inspire me to do even more with my life. And I might add that, many people who have read my book have now described it as a love story. And I love that description. When people hear somebody suffers a catastrophic injury and is now paralyzed, they think it's going to be just totally depressing, the type of life that that particular individual must be living. I'm here to tell you and your audience, I'm actually living a wonderful life. I have so many good things taking place in my life right now a wonderful, wonderful family. That includes obviously my wife and triplet sons, but a brother or a sister, cousins, aunts, uncles, so many incredible people that have helped me every step of the way. And I'm leading a very happy life. And I want other people to know they can do that as well.
Ken, you were an absolutely amazing guest for the Apollo Papyrus podcast, and I thank you for appearing on this podcast.
Well, thank you, Aaron. And thanking you for giving me the opportunity to share my story.
Ken was an amazing guest to host, and his life story is one of many reasons why people should never take reasonable accommodations for disabled people for granted. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. Copyright 2025, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.